Welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. I'm Wendy O'Connell, and my guest today is Meg Little Reilly. Meg is a writer, and she is a novelist, and she was born and raised in Brattleboro. Along the way, Meg was a producer for Vermont Public Radio, and eventually she landed in D.C., where she worked in national politics and at the White House. In the White House, she was a communicator for the Environmental Defense Fund. She was a spokesperson at the U.S. Treasury, and then an appointee in the Obama administration. Quite a trajectory. Meg moved back to Vermont, hooray, in 2017, and most recently, her third novel, The Misfortunes of Family, was published just last week. Welcome, Meg.
Thank you.
It's great to have you on the show.
I'm happy to be here.
Yes, and we really appreciate you taking time out from your very busy book tour and talking about your new book. So because you're a Brattleboro girl and you spent a lot of time in town, I'd love to hear about from your vantage point, looking at all of the things that you did as a kid. What were the big influences that you remember?
Well, the biggest influence, I think, on my life in general was growing up with so much access to nature. Just the sort of lines between inside and outside were so permeable, and spending so much time barefoot in the woods, that had a huge influence on how I spend my day and how I conceive of myself and what I want from the world, I think. Those are sort of the earliest memories. And as I think about my years getting a little bit older, there were a couple of formative Brattleboro educational experiences that were really important to me. I went to Hilltop Montessori School from kindergarten until third grade, which was when the grades ended at third at the time. And that was an extraordinary experience for me. I made some great friends, but also I had unfettered access to reading and writing. The nature of the pedagogy was such that we could basically pursue the things we were most interested in. And I remember doing mostly reading and writing at the time, which was just so fruitful. And there are grammatical and storytelling parameters and laws that I remember referring to for many years later that I got when I must have been in like first or second grade. I have kids this age now, and I'm not sure that they're actually like thinking about the theory of storytelling the same way that I remember getting at Hilltop. So I'm really grateful for that experience. Actually, it was really wonderful.
Yes.
And then I went to Brattleboro Area Middle School and BUHS, and had some fantastic teachers in that time.
Did you?
As well.
Yeah. Was it during that time that your interest in politics was woken up?
Yes. In fact, I can draw a very direct line back to, I think the name of the course was Politics and Elections. It was taught by Charlie McLaughlin, who was a really extraordinary teacher, and he was also a sports coach. Everybody seems to have a different Charlie story, but he had a big impression on me because he made, I wasn't interested in the sort of sport and strategy of politics, but I was interested in the issues, and I wanted to pursue social justice. I was interested in the things that change our lives through policy. And he helped all of us, I think, understand the ways in which our lives were affected by the decisions made by people very far away. And also, he made it immediate and accessible, which is a hard thing to understand when you're 16.
Yeah.
The idea that this is ever something that you could actually play an active role in. So by bringing the levers of politics into relief for us was like a really big light bulb moment for me.
Oh, that's so interesting. It's great, isn't it, that there's something like direct like that.
Yeah.
You were very interested in reading and writing and language at an early age.
Yeah. I'd always written. It was like more compulsion than something even all of that intentional. And I knew that I loved it, and then I just sort of did it constantly. But the idea that I could have been a writer, it didn't really even occur to me. It seemed like I knew that people were writers, obviously, but it just seemed like this like rarefied existence that was not available to kids like me. I don't know why exactly. I think it was somewhere in high school or middle school where I started to understand like that's got to be my hobby, and then I'm going to pursue the other. I have to somehow find a way to like create a vocation through the other things I'm interested in. And I really was interested in the things going on in the world and politics. And it actually like, so they sort of operated on parallel paths for a long time, but I did find a way in, at first at Vermont Public Radio, and then in graduate school, and then in my work in politics to start to sort of fuse technical writing and communicating and politics and things like that. And I understood that I could actually probably weave these things together and make a life out of it.
Yes.
But it, with a little craftiness.
Yes. Well, and going back a little bit to when you were in grade school, especially, there were some great role models in Brattleboro for kids writing. We had Karen Hess here, for one.
Yes.
And
who was an early friend actually to my family, and so I felt like I was in the presence of a star.
Yeah.
That was huge for me, actually.
Yeah, you were actually. I
yes,
think,
I was.
I mean, she's done so well, and she's written such great books. And so you went to UVM, and were you studying political science?
Yes, I did. I think it's funny. I almost forgot. I majored in political geography, and I minored in sociology and English. I mean, what we major in liberal arts college is like, but those were the things I was most interested in, all of them together, and it was great. I enjoyed it all, and then I went to graduate school at the George Washington University for Media and Public Affairs is the name of the program, and it's kind of a hybrid between journalism and political advocacy. So everybody was either basically like pursuing a career path as a reporter, or they were going to go work for the Democratic or Republican Party, something like that.
Yes. After you graduated from George Washington, did you go right into national politics?
So after grad school, I had an internship in the Senate. The Democrats were in the majority at the time, so I was working in the Senate TV and radio studio, which at the time was under the leadership of Harry Reid, and which was cool. And that was also there was kind of a bridge because I'd been at VPR before graduate school, so I had some little bit of experience there. The coolest thing about that job was that members were just coming through all day long. So I got to meet basically every member of the Senate on both sides in that time, and like Senator Barack Obama, who was nobody even really knew his name at the time, and it was a neat time to be able to do that.
Were you talking to these people about various things and issues and that kind of thing?
Yeah.
Was that your job?
No, my job was so much less glamorous than that. I was like pinning microphones on their shirts and stuff. I was when you see like public debates on television and stuff, and all the flags have these like really tidy angles to them. I was scotch taping clothes hangers to the backs of them. So I got to absorb a lot. I wasn't doing anything of consequence at all. But that was really exciting to me. Like I got to see how all the sausage gets made. And in many ways, like those early jobs where you're a fly on the wall and you're basically invisible to all of the people in power are the moments when like you get to stay in the rooms you're not really supposed to be in.
Yes.
And so I knew, since I'd already been, I was in grad school at the time, and I knew that I was interested in like the communications angle and also national politics, and that was a really cool foot in the door. And then I ended up I was at the Environmental Defense Fund briefly as a communicator, but then I ended up at it was a political consulting firm that that was started by a bunch of former Bill Clinton administration people. My mentor was Joe Lockhart, who'd been a press secretary for Bill Clinton during the Lewinsky era. So that was like, I met a lot of people in that time. I was there for a couple of years. The Democratic primary for the 2008 election, I was volunteering. I got selected to be like a press attaché for the Obama family. This was in Denver. That's where the convention was. And I got to follow around Michelle Obama's brother. I was because he was also, he's a basketball coach and kind of a star in his own right. And so it was a real misfit because I was actually just like wrangling people from ESPN and stuff, and I don't know anything about sport. But that was so. Anyways, through a bunch of like, I just kind of kept raising my hand and trying to like elbow my way into these situations, and then a lot of it is luck and timing too with jobs like this.
Yes.
How well you can. It's combat once you're in, but the getting in is you have to just kind of keep like trying to insert yourself into these moments. I think, yeah.
And at the same time, you're absorbing tons of stuff about how all that works, right?
It was really fun. I didn't go on a honeymoon because the convention was a few weeks after I got married, and my husband was a reporter at the time, and he had to go cover it, and I was volunteering for it, and we were both like, "This is the best honeymoon ever." We weren't even see each other, but it was exciting. It was a fun time.
Behind all of this, you've been interested in policy in general, right? And so, how does that fit in with the jobs that you've had?
It's all been very wonky. My first job in the Obama administration was in the Treasury Department, and this was it's easy to forget now, but the first couple months of that, the economy was sort of in a free fall, and I was a spokesperson for the bank bailouts and the auto company restructuring and the mortgage program, all programs at the time that everyone on the left and the right hated. So it was like very long, stressful days.
Yes.
I'm sure it shaved a decade off my life in that time.
Right.
But I had to get fluent in a language that I only really knew the surface of very quickly.
Yes.
But fear is a strong motivator, and the idea of going head to head with like a Wall Street Journal reporter and not knowing what I was talking about was it was awful. That only has to happen like once or twice to know that you need to work hard. And so I got to be in the room with Tim Geithner as he did these things every day, and all of and a lot of other people who were senior administration officials, and like the whole economics team from the White House. And we were sort of working hand in glove with the team from the West Wing at the time, and everybody. It was just like an all hands on deck crisis moment, which it's great, and I mean, it's professionally great in that like you get to learn a lot very fast. One of my bosses said at one point, if you have to cry in the bathroom, and if you have to sleep, crawl under your desk. That was the kind of environment it was for a while.
Right, I believe that. And also being a spokesperson and a communicator and a speechwriter as well in all of these jobs, right?
Yeah.
You have to think on your feet all the time and be able to articulate things really quickly.
Yes. Later, when I went to the White House, I was working in the White House Office of Management and Budget, so I was still talking about economic and fiscal policy, and I really thought of the work as being like kind of a translator in a way, trying to make this really opaque language available to the rest of the country.
Yes.
And for instance, there's a sort of sense that like there's an inevitability to like an American middle class. But there isn't. The middle class exists because the home mortgage was invented, and also with the GI Bill, we started sending middle class and working class people to college, things like that. Like these were policy choices that actually created class mobility for people. And so it's important to know how to talk about them in ways that are accessible.
And to understand them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so first you've got to understand them, and then
yeah.
you can translate.
Yeah.
So you were on huge learning curves probably every day.
Yeah, it was like a fire hose. And the other thing is like, you don't agree with everything you're talking
That's
about.
right.
I mean, you have to agree with most of it. You have to feel like most of what you're doing is good. And if you don't, you have to like get a different job, basically. And which is also a thing that happens when you work in, sometimes your heroes disappoint you, and there are a lot of compromises made. And there's certainly, you witness a lot of, you figure out quickly whose moral compass is intact and whose is not. And you have to keep like checking in with yourself on those things.
Yes, and I think that comes into your fiction as well, which we'll get to. I think everybody would love to hear what it was like to actually be with Obama.
It was a great privilege. It's a good feeling to know that the person in charge is definitely the smartest person in the room with the most nimble mind. He's also cool.
Yeah, right.
And he has a really amazing sense of comedic timing, there is also, when he's there, you get the sense that everybody wants to like listen to his charm a little bit too.
Yeah, and soak it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So you got to see him in a day-to-day kind of way.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, here and there. I was not, most of the White House offices exist in the executive building, which is the sort of attached building to the West Wing. It's just a couple tiny little rooms, actually. So we sort of went in and out. Like the vice president's office was right next to my office, and it was neat.
Yeah. So you saw a lot of Biden as well.
Yes,
then.
that's right.
Yes. Yeah. And did you have a relationship with him in the work that you did?
I mean, if I bumped into Barack Obama today, I don't think he would remember who I am now.
Well, he might. You never know.
But he knew what I did at the time.
Yes.
All of the most senior people in the administration, they were all losing sleep over how consequential the work that they were doing was. We were all kind of constantly reminding each other. It's easy to feel divorced from the rest from the rest of the country when you're like when you're sort of behind those walls.
Yeah.
But so I think that there's an imperative to keep saying all of this matters. Every small choice matters a lot, and I really felt like we all felt that, and there was a reverence to that work that I miss. And I also, it feels like I feel very grateful for the privilege of it.
Yes. In relation to your writing, I get the feeling, reading what you've written, and this is fiction, I've read a little bit of your commentaries, that you're really exploring things.
My editor said after my second book, I think your thing is moral ambiguity, and I like that. I'll take it.
Yeah.
I do think it is. One of the things that's really fun about writing fiction is that you really just get to, it's an opportunity to ask a question. And I don't always know exactly what question it is I'm asking when I start the book. I think it's about one thing, and then I kind of start moving through it. So like with this most recent book, it's a story about family relationships and the bonds of siblings. And what I realized when I started writing it is it's also about this question of how do we reconcile the codes and laws of the families we come from and the ones that we're creating in adulthood. And I think that's part of the work of being in your 30s and 40s is trying to be intentional about what you keep and what you let fall away. And that book is told also through the eyes of the partners of each of the adult children. And the reason I did that was because I think it's like, they're slightly more reliable narrators. I'm not sure that any of us really see our own immediate families very clearly. But also because there's something unknowable when you marry into a family, or you're even just going home with someone for the first time at Thanksgiving. There's a sort of unknowability of other people's families, right? They're sort of closed tribes in a way. And that's kind of fascinating too, how you get there.
Yeah. And the fact that it's a political family as well. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah, I definitely drew on some archetypes of my time in Washington. The motivations are so outsized, and you are in the presence of, well, I should say, most of the people I worked with were very principled, decent people, but they're not really as fun to write about. So this is really a story about hubris and greed, and and those are fun things. It's just like a Greek tragedy scale of everything. And it's interesting to know what motivates people to those edges.
Yes, right. I know that you're kind of attuned to suspense in your stories, and you also like apocalyptic fiction as well. Certainly your first book. And did a lot of that come out of your work with the Environmental Agency?
Yeah, certainly some of it did.
Yeah.
I think too, working in the federal government at a time when there's probably a more palpable sense of it now, but in the last sort of decade, I think all of our catastrophic imaginations have expanded a little bit, and certainly mine did. It's in many ways, it's like the more you know about what could happen, the less safe you feel. And so that sounds terribly frightening, but it's kind of interesting to explore. And so like with my first book, which is about a kind of superstorm, for the science, I did a lot of research for the science of it, and the storm itself is bigger than any storm that's ever actually happened. But to put it together, I looked at the worst case scenario predictions for basically all of the biggest storms that have happened in the United States in the last 20 years. And then I imagine that they happened in quick succession, and they were sort of triggered one another, and there was kind of a compounding effect. It wasn't totally science fiction, and I wanted it to be within the realm of possibility. An actual climate scientist can disagree with me on this. I am not a scientist, but you know, I wanted it to feel like the outermost edges of what's actually possible.
Right.
And I think working in the federal government did give me a sense that more is possible than most of us would like to imagine most of the time. So it's great fodder for fiction writing.
Yes. One thing you said is that, and I want to talk about this too, storytelling. And stories are the connective tissue between abstract values and real life choices. And, you know, there's such a storytelling rebirth going on all over the place. We have a couple in town, you know, it's really wonderful. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I think the difference between knowing things to be true, having a set of values, and having and storytelling around it is that storytelling is a shared experience. So there's a parallel to be made here in the storytelling that happens in all of the world's oldest religions. That's a shared story. But there's also a shared story of what it means to be American. I think what a lot of what we're witnessing right now is an argument over what that story is. Some of us have a more expansive version of it than others. And I actually think that the story that we arrive at, I think it matters a lot. Because whether or not you're part of the story of who America is has everything to do with a sense of belonging and an entitlement to be here in this place and pursue what you want to pursue. And then we pass these things on to our children, and they share them and turn them around and find their holes in school together. And so, and we also know that cognitively, we retain stories, which is very different from retaining a discrete series of facts. And then we can kind of use that to extrapolate from that and how to navigate the world. And everybody is a storyteller. It's not actually, even it predates writing, it predates publishing. This is actually the way we know who the stories of our families and where we come from and why we do the things we do.
And the things that we remember. And the things that we remember differently,
even
in the same family.
Yes, that's right.
You also talk about the necessity of storytelling for doing justice work.
I think, because the ability to, we can share information about how people are living in poverty right now. People are struggling to, living without health care, things like this. But stories are the version of that where we actually get to feel ourselves in other people, right? I think that, we know this, actually, reading fiction inspires empathy in people. It changes our brain in that way. And I can't think of anything. It's so exciting to me that it has that effect, because it also feels like the most natural and appealing way to understand things to me. And you can see this in your children. You can see this in young people in general. This is the way they want to understand the world, actually. They would, reading books is the most natural way to start to actually make sense of the world that they're watching and living in.
It's true, isn't it? And I think a lot of that has to do with you're sitting alone with something that you are taking in, but there's a relationship there as well.
Yeah, and then you're creating a world too, right? There's the story you're being read. But then there's the world you're painting in your own head around it, and that's why we kind of hold on to those things.
And that's why movies are sometimes so disappointing, taken from the books that we've read.
They feel so much smaller.
Yeah, and finite. I realized this recently. The book business has now really become the book industry, and things have changed so much, and it's so hard to get published There are so many people who are self-expressing and self-publishing, which is fabulous. It's really wonderful. But what was your route? How did it work for you?
It's a tough world right now. In many ways, the barriers to entry are lower because of self-publishing,
Yes.
and there's so many more platforms to do it. But to get one of the mainstream publisher to get your books on bookshelves and sort of more broadly is tougher than ever. There's a kind of there is both a risk aversion among publishers, and then also still kind of a gambler's sense of like putting all the resources behind one or two books that come out each season, and then they sort of will those books into success.
Yes.
It's maddening. A friend of mine who also writes said the other day that it's much more venture capitalism than anything else now, which I think is an interesting parallel. So I started writing my first book while I was in my last year at the White House. I would just wake up at like 5 o'clock in the morning and write for about an hour before I had to jump on the morning White House communications call. And I did that it took about a year with the drafting and rewriting. And then I just did it the old-fashioned way, and I started querying agents, which took a while. And then it took my agent another nearly a year to find a publisher for that book. Everything moves. I was like, I'd been living in a world where things were happening so quickly that they sort of dissolve the second they're not right before you. And like the pace of the publishing was, it was maddening, but I feel incredibly grateful for it. And that first book, and then the book that I wrote basically was the book that was published. It changed not at all in that time, which is also one of the crazier things about the way it works now. Basically, to be a new author, they want your book to be publish ready is sort of the term for it. I think there's less of an appetite to like cultivate talent now.
Right. Or an editor working with
Yeah,
you, standing by you.
which is such a shame also. So, it's the economics and the whole, all of the market forces behind how it works now is just the least fun thing about being a writer.
I'll bet it is, yes. But you still get to express yourself,
Yes.
which is the most important thing, right?
Yes.
Coming back to Vermont, you're living in a rather rural area.
Yes. Yeah, just south of Burlington, Heinsberg.
Was that a big shift for you and your family?
It was a big shift. Yeah, I felt really ready for it, but it was stark. I'd lived in the 10 years I lived in Washington, we lived right in city proper. And I really loved city living, and there are things about it that I miss sometimes. But I also really missed the smells and sounds of nature. And I knew that I wanted my kids to be able to get some grass between their toes. And so I think when it was time, it was very time. And I still I woke up the other day and we just had this massive snowstorm. And I just went like snowshoeing through these rolling hills in my backyard. And I still so regularly think, I can't believe I get to live here.
Yes, I know. And I think a lot of us feel the same way, especially in a moment like that when everything is covered with snow. We don't see mud season coming, which will hit us between the eyes. So you're in the middle of a book tour, and your book tour is for your latest book, The Misfortunes of Family. And folks in the area can go to their local bookstores. Please go to your local bookstores and pick up Meg Little Reilly's newest book, and she has the two others too that will be on the shelf right next to it because it's alphabetical. Meg Little Reilly, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Yes,
it was an honor.
It was excellent. And thanks to all of you for joining us today, for listening to Meg and her stories about growing up here in Washington, D.C., and book writing and publishing. We will be back next week. We are a weekly show, and we will have yet another person in the Brattleboro area coming on to talk about who and what they are and what they do. Thanks so much for tuning in.